Aloha Fide and aloha. Thank you all for joining us again today. Welcome to the 5th webinar in the Pacific Desk 2022 webinar series. I am David Hitzel, the Pacific Desk Guam instructor, and today's topic of discussion is king tides, coastal flooding, dissecting and comparing two events to boost lead time on forecasts, communication, and community preparedness. Our usual reminders before we begin: this is being recorded for educational documentational purposes and will be posted simultaneously on Facebook Live. If you're over there on Facebook Live, please maybe state that you're there and kind of give us an idea of how many viewers are watching in the room. That's helpful to us later on. Please leave questions in the comment section, including your location and affiliation. Questions can also be asked through Facebook Live, and a period of oral questioning will be allowed at the end of the talk. Please otherwise refrain, though, from having your video or audio switched on. And lastly, I will, this is of course being recorded, and I will pass on the video recording to you in a couple of days through the email. Okay, so our next webinar will be in mid-November, and this will pertain to disaster management. Our speaker will be Jenna Bloss, the Public Information Officer at Guam Homeland Security and Office of Civil Defense. She will give an overview of their agency, various programs, capabilities, the Emergency Operations Center, and their emergency preparedness outreach initiatives. The following webinar in early December will delve into the basic principles of hydrology, including groundwater recharge, canopy interception, evapotranspiration, etc. For this one will be Dr. Chris Schuler of the UH Water Resources Research Center, and he'll discuss his projects in American Samoa, including climate and stream monitoring, a water budget model, which uses the stream data for groundwater modeling. Chris will also introduce the concept of participatory modeling, which relates to a new portion of the Pacific Desk that Jennifer and I are currently developing. All right, so today's panel. Our first speaker, I think, will be Brandon Aydlett. He is the Science and Operations Officer at WFO Guam, where he oversees office training, technical ability, and access to cutting-edge tools. He was previously the lead meteorologist at WFO Guam since 2019 and a forecaster since 2010. He also functioned as the Fire Weather Program Lead and Tropical Cyclone Program Assistant Lead. Before that, he was a meteorologist for the Atmospheric Technology Services Company and Missile Defense Test Launch Site on Kwajalein in the Republic of the Marshall Islands. Brandon has a Bachelor of Science in Meteorology from North Carolina State University with specialization in broadcast journalism. He has functioned as co-author in research pertaining to daily fire danger categorization on Guam, the fire weather program on Guam, and improved forecasting techniques for increased lead times of deep tropic convective hazards. He also received a regional NWS Isaac Klein Award for redesigning WFO Guam's tropical cyclone workshop, and he's an accomplished musician. Brandon Bukunt is a journeyman forecaster and climate focal point at WFO Guam, where he has been working since 2018. Brandon attained his Master's of Science in Meteorology from the University of Hawaii with a thesis focus on drop wind zone data from tropical cyclones in the eastern North Pacific. Brandon was born in Boston, Massachusetts, but grew up primarily in Indonesia, Singapore, and California, and he is an accomplished fisherman, surfer, and swimmer. And today's topic is king tides. So in preparing for this webinar, I realized that the king tides phrase is actually kind of new to the US. I thought I had always heard this, but maybe I heard it originally from the Southern Hemisphere. So king tides originally is apparently an Aussie term. So in New Zealand and Australia, they've been using it for some time, and it's just kind of caught on in the Northern Hemisphere. What it describes are the highest astronomical tides of the year, This is known scientifically as the perigean spring tides. Perigean means refers to when the moon is closest to the Earth. So when the sun, moon, and Earth are in alignment, the additive gravitational pull of the three bodies creates extreme tides. This usually occurs during new or full moon periods, often during the summer and winter, which is important. And I'm sure Brandon will go into that. King tides themselves can be a hazard to coastal and low-lying regions, producing flooding in urban areas as well as other nuisance flooding. On the positive side, tides, of course, are predictable. However, under adverse meteorological or oceanic conditions, they can have unpredictable and increasingly hazardous effects. One of the useful things, though, about king tides is they're sort of a prevision into the world of future higher sea levels and the impacts we might encounter with those. So king tides, coastal flooding. So various components are involved in this with different predictive timescales, including sea level height anomalies, sea level pressure anomalies, strong upstream winds and distant swells, and in rare cases, storm surge. Short and long-term climate change impacts are also add on to the overall effect of king tides. So this leads to a very complicated situation to predict. So this webinar is designed to help forecasters learn how to better predict such a complex set of events, and also to discuss how can we use these events to predict future climate impacts and what to do to prepare for those impacts. Alrighty, I'm not sure which Brandon's going first, but let me.
All right. Well, I'll go ahead and share our screen real quick, and so we're going to be presenting from the same screen, and so stand by. We'll get that pulled up, and we'll do that right now. And let's see. All right. So we're watching also on our laptops on the table to make sure everything's working good. And thank you, David, for the great introduction. I am Brandon Aydlett, the Science and Operations Officer. And so Brandon and myself, we will be kind of volleying back and forth as we go from topic to topic. But first, before we proceed, just want to give a shout out to several different organizations and folks that really provide a lot of data for monitoring conditions, sea levels, marine forecasting around the Pacific. So the University of Hawaii Sea Level Center and also the PAC-IUS, they provide a lot of guidance. The PAC-IUS wave model, the Voyager program for viewing the WaveWatch 3 model data is a really nice platform for looking at a lot of wave forecasting. And then also Elizabeth Vickery out of the National Weather Service Pacific Region headquarters, she had pulled together a lot of data, especially looking into the July king tide event. But before we get too deep into this, I just wanted to go ahead and specify, we're not going to be digging deeply into the wave characteristics, the wave fundamentals, about how the waves develop, as much as looking more into a recap of these two events, December 2021 and July 2022, looking at the different public communications, at least by the Weather Service. So the National Weather Service office here in Guam, Hawaii, and also in American Samoa, to see how the different offices communicated ahead of these events and even during or after these events. We're going to be looking for areas of improvement, because really when you have a significant event, whether you have a stellar performance forecasting and communicating these events, it's always good to look for ways that you can still improve further. And ultimately the goal is to provide the general public sufficient time and information to allow them to take those precautions to protect themselves and their property. And so we will recap with a kind of a presentation of a framework that forecasters can use operationally to look for these types of events in the weeks to months ahead of time, and then refine that forecast and boost that confidence to communicate and then add it to the forecast. So importantly, just as David mentioned, what is a king tide? It's just technically a perigean spring tide, and some of the statistics on the right side. Ultimately, when the moon, the earth, and the sun are in alignment, that is when you see the highest amplitude tides. So that is the highest high tides and the lowest low tides. Here across the Marianas and across much of Micronesia, we do see exposed reef at these perigean, the spring tide, low tides. And so the phases of the perigee and also the full and new moons are not quite in sync, but they happen enough times that we see probably 6 to 8 cycles per year of these perigean spring tides. And so that would be the colloquial term king tide. So just a little bit of a bearing. This in the red rectangle to the left, that is the National Weather Service Guam's area of responsibility. And then you've got Honolulu right there in Hawaii, American Samoa down in the South Pacific. But ultimately, we're all part of the Pacific family of islands. And so we all share that same burden of forecasting and communicating the various marine-based threats. And keep in mind, these can be blue sky hazards. People will wake up in the morning, the sky is blue, perfect weather. What could go wrong? And then people set up plans to go on the waters, go fishing, and then these large swell events come in and kind of just surprise everybody. So we're going to look at 2 events. We're going to compare these 2 events. The first one in December 2021 has significant impacts for the Micronesia region and not so much for the rest of the Pacific. Event number 2 in mid-July 2022, that one had pretty significant impacts across the central and southern Pacific, but none whatsoever in the Micronesia region. And so with that said, I'm going to toss it over to Brandon, and he will go over some of the details with these 2 events. So take it, Brandon. Spacebar will be your control.
Microphone's out of here?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Good morning. Good afternoon, everybody. So the first event we're going to look at is a large coastal flooding event across Micronesia in particular. The focus of the event is probably best described as across the FSM, with maybe Chuuk being the worst impacts that we're aware of. So this satellite image here is from early December, and that yellow box there is kind of zooming in on that, and the image on the right is a scatterometer, so satellite-derived wind speeds. And what you're seeing is a very strong, lengthy fetch of winds in the storm activity to the north, pointed at islands of Micronesia. And one thing to keep in mind is this image, the satellite image, it may look small, but this is a very expansive region. And so just highlighting that it's a much larger region than it may look. So here are some of the impacts that were shared with us from this event in early December 2021. Most of these places are outer islands of Chuuk State. And just to summarize the text in the yellow there, damage across some of the islands had inundation up to 40 feet inland, major erosion across the north and east facing parts of the islands. There was infrastructure damage, agriculture, residential, and there was even some instances where the freshwater wells were infiltrated with salt water. So you can imagine on these atolls that rely on fresh water for even drinking water, it can become really concerning. So one of the main ingredients for these impactful coastal flooding events is La Nina. As many of us are already well aware, La Nina tends to pile up higher sea levels across the Western Pacific, and another kind of a tongue that extends into the South Pacific Islands, American Samoa, Cook Islands in that area as well. And so what we saw here in December of 2021 was based on the UHC level analysis, 15 to 25 centimeter higher sea level heights across Micronesia, with a real kind of epicenter around Yap State and Chuuk State. The image on the right is there's a little bit to unpack here, but it has a lot of information relevant to this event. And what you have there on the y-axis is time starting at November at the top and then mid-December at the bottom. The x-axis is where you are longitudinally, and then you see a map of the equatorial globe below that. And so if we kind of just ballpark 120 east as near Palau, and then 180, of course, of the date line. So Micronesia is mainly between 120 and 180 on the x-axis there. And what you're seeing here is from November through mid-December, you have all the blues, the purples. These are all enhanced easterly winds piling up that La Nina signal in the West Pacific. So just enhanced trade winds, a very strong trade wind flow. The reds you're seeing are indicative of westerly winds. And for much of November, all the westerlies were across the Indian Ocean. And then as we start to head towards the end of November into the first week of December, you see that westerly wind anomaly signature, or enhanced westerly winds, begin to migrate into the West Pacific. So it's pushing westerly winds through Indonesia, through the equatorial parts of the maritime continent, and into what we would call much of Micronesia there. And you see a strong signal. And this signal, late December, or late November into early December, aligned with that king tide cycle. So you had a phasing of ingredients, a stacking of these two ingredients. The image on the left is highlighting this strong Madden-Julian oscillation signal that really amplified in the maritime continent and into the West Pacific basin. And this signal, if you look to the graphic on the right, drove down a regional sea level pressure signal. And the Chuuk Lagoon on, I believe it was December 4th, recorded a station pressure of 1,001 millibars. And that's about 7 millibars less than normal. And with less sea level pressure, the local or the regional sea level can rise a bit because there's less atmospheric pressure on it. And this kind of corresponds to a sea level increase of 6 to 7 centimeters. So here's just another ingredient at play for this December 2021 event, is this slight bulge or localized bulge due to a little bit less sea level pressure. This image here is another scatterometer image showing the surface winds across the region. This is, again, a very large area that you're looking at, all the way from the Philippines to Hawaii, so in a very large region. And there's three sources that kind of focus their energy, three storm systems that kind of focus their energy across Micronesia. The large northeast swell that you can see is shown as number 1. We had a typhoon northwest of the Marianas, a Typhoon Nyato. And then in its infancy, you begin to see that westerly wind burst south of Palau, which is source number 3. And this westerly wind burst signal got much stronger, but in order to capture kind of the main players, swell players, this is the image that was shown. And so you have a broad area of low pressure kind of focusing across the FSM. The image on the right is showing some of the buoy data from a wave buoy off of Guam on the east side. And what you can see is that you had a long period energy of around 5, maybe even 6 feet registering at the EPAM buoy on the east side of Guam. So a very energetic swell. It's not typical that islands of the West Pacific see these long period swells of 16, 18 seconds. So it's a bit of a rather atypical, anomalous event. And I have also there Papua New Guinea, because this event, December 2021, also had quite a bit of coastal impacts across the northern side of Papua New Guinea, and to my knowledge also the Solomon Islands. So here is a PACIOS wave run-up forecast for Majuro from the December 2021 event. And what you can see is that the signal from this model, the yellow vertical bar is where we at on December 6th. And you can see it exceeded the A level and approached the B level inundation events. And what was actually ended up happening was that portions of the Marshall Islands did experience quite a bit of flooding. Kwajalein in particular, parts of Kwajalein had wave run up well up into the normally dry ground. So this is one of the tools that is used to assess coastal flooding and wave run up. Another instrument we have, courtesy of the UH Sea Level Center, is a tide gauge in Kapinga Morongi. And what we have here is looking at the top image, November 7th through January 30th. So a rather lengthy time period here to take a look at the cycles of the moon. And in the green graph in particular is residual. So that's basically looking at, it's kind of canceling out the influence of the tides, astronomical tides. And it kind of allows you to pick apart how much higher the sea level is than what can be typically predicted. And you see, when you start to get into that new moon of December 5th, you had residual heights of about plus 20 inches, which is can lead to certainly lead to coastal impacts. Matt Widlansky at the UH Sea Level Center will typically say that there are quite a bit of coastal impacts once you start to creep into the 0.5 meters above mean high water on a tide gauge measurement. And maybe the basic way to think of mean high water is the height above normally dry ground. So jumping to another rather impactful coastal flooding event was a very powerful system to the southeast of New Zealand in July 2022. This storm system produced widespread coastal flooding across islands of the South Pacific and even created some rather impressive wave run-up and coastal splashover for the Hawaiian Islands as well. The little sidebar image on the left is a satellite that's assessing the wind speeds with this system well to the southeast of New Zealand. And what it's able to detect is that surface wind speeds exceeded 65 knots within a rather broad area with this system that pushed northeastward across the South Pacific. So looking at the La Nina sea level signal for July 2022, and what you have shown in the black circled area is sea level heights were about 10 to 20 centimeters above normal. And this extracts the long-term kind of sea level, global sea level rise signal. So it's mainly looking at the influence from a La Nina perspective. Just a quick analysis of this particular storm system. These images are from a StormSurf, a website that's well used by many swell and surf forecast people. It's created by Mark Sponsler. But he has a very nice tool on it where he basically overlays satellite altimetry measurements over global model guidance of sea heights. And what you can see in the zoomed in graphic in the middle is that little stripe that's showing differing colors, more purples, more pinks in that little southwest to northeast strip. And that's the altimeter measurement. And the take-home point here is that the altimeter measured seas quite a bit higher than the global models. And a different platform that's showing the same data is the one in the bottom right there, showing seas of 32 up to maybe even 37, 38 feet over a large area. So this is the source of that really impressive southerly swell for the Pacific in July. Pacayos and CDIP, they have a wave buoy off of the south side of American Samoa. And looking on the left side of this slide, you can see the wave model is the curve in purple, a purplish color. And then the observations from the wave buoy are in green. And so what you can quite clearly see is that the wave observations well exceeded the model guidance at this buoy. The model had about 10 to 11 foot seas, while the wave buoy measured seas in excess of 15 feet at times. The graphic in the middle shows the max wave data from this buoy, and you can see several spikes from July 14th registering over 25 feet for the max wave. And then kind of picking apart this wave buoy data into how much of it is long period swell, how much of it is shorter period swell. And what you can see is that you had a large, very long period swell showing 18 to 22 seconds around that 5 to even 8, up to 8 foot height. So a very powerful, strong system with long period swell. Here are a few photos from the Cook Islands. This is courtesy of a researcher down there in the Cook Islands, Matt Blaka. But you can see some very powerful southerly ocean swell for the Cook Islands there, damaged coastal buildings through very large boulders up onto the coastal roads. And the bottom right there, that red circle is supposed to kind of be over the peak of that black curve there. But you can see how anomalous that sharp increase in the black curve is there mid-July. And the last event that reached this high for Northern Cook Islands tide gauge was back in 2010 during Cyclone Pat, which passed directly over this tide gauge. So it just speaks to how impressive this event was. It was 10 years ago from a cyclone that passed directly over the tide gauge that reached these kind of sea level heights before. And looking 3 days later, so it hit the Cook Islands, it hit American Samoa, and then 3 days later, this same swell impacted the Hawaiian Islands well to the north. This is on the left is a analysis of the wave buoy off of Oahu, and it kind of peaked around 6 feet at 18 to 22 seconds. And the image in the middle to the right is kind of the area of the Big Island of Hawaii that saw these rather viral videos that made news agencies worldwide of large waves kind of crashing over a wedding, and then also a large waves crashing over townhomes, which are right on the coast of the Big Island. Here are also a few images from American Samoa. A state of emergency was issued for this event, and through our colleagues at Pago Pago office, there was considerable damage to the coastlines of Tutuila, Aonu'u, and Manua Islands. The airport at Pago Pago was shut down, as well as another airport nearby. So you can see that some of these images, again, just some rather impressive coastal flooding due to this July event. So the primary ingredients for both of these coastal flooding events: large, long period swell. In the South Pacific example, very, very long period swell. Higher regional sea levels associated with La Nina, and then a phasing with the king tide cycle. And we often will call this kind of a stacking of ingredients that just contribute. They pile on each other to create further bigger impacts. And just a quick comparison of these two events and some of the main ingredients at play. So for the Micronesia event and the South Pacific, La Nina was a moderate to strong signal. For the Micronesia event, with the westerly wind burst and a rather amplified Madden-Julian oscillation signal, driving down that regional sea level pressure, which leads to higher local sea levels. That was rather strong, and just a quick analysis didn't seem to show much of a signal for the South Pacific. Very strong long period swell in both examples, more or less. King tide phasing. So these events aligned with that king tide cycle very well, unfortunately. And then there's also, of course, a background global sea level rise signal. And it's important to mention that this was not an empirically derived kind of a comparison between these two events, but just to try to give the forecaster and science-minded individuals just a familiarity with the biggest contributors and perhaps lesser contributors. And of course, perhaps maybe the elephant in the room, what about background sea level rise? We've seen from many studies, much of what NOAA has published, that sea level rise is in fact rising. And the overarching theme is that it tends to load the dice in favor of more frequent events in the future. Looking at this tide chart here from Kwajalein from 1950 to 2020, and what we're seeing in the analysis, regardless of what curve you use there, but it equates to about maybe 0.15 meters of a sea level rise since 1950. And when you consider some of the signals and the trade-wind forcing that leads to higher sea levels with La Nina of up to 15, 25, even 30 centimeters, it's quite clear in a shorter time scale that La Nina signal, whether it's El Nino with lower sea levels or La Nina with much higher sea levels across the Pacific, West Pacific, is a huge player. Whereas the signal from the global sea level rise is just a very gradual increasing signal that tends to load the dice as we continue into the future. And I think with that, I'm going to pass it over to Brandon, And if you had anything you wanted to clarify with what I said, please do.
All right. Yeah. So let me go ahead and grab the keyboard, and there may be some more questions coming up in the chat, so feel free to monitor those, Brandon. But getting back to a comparison of the two events, we mentioned Micronesia had no impacts from the July event. And so the biggest question was why. We had everything was pretty much there. We had the king tide cycle. We had the La Nina increased in sea heights. But ultimately, Micronesia was largely blocked by the South Pacific swell. And all the islands across the South Pacific largely creates a barrier that prevents that South Pacific swell to come up into the Micronesia region. And so you can see that on the left graphic with the period, the wave watch 3 period, it pretty much ceases right along this island chain. And then just the empty map on the right side, you can see all the different Solomon Islands to the Papua New Guinea, and then Fiji, and just all the central South Pacific islands that largely create that barrier to the Micronesia region. There is a little window, though, that does promote some south swell passage that will affect parts of the Marshall Islands and Kosrae. And so this swell event was probably that first a precursor swell event. So here's the big swell, the leading edge, and then the precursor swell event that was already emanating across the Pacific. So let's look at take a quick look at the pre-event communication and some of the decision points. And so for the December event, we're looking at the communications out of the Guam Weather Forecast Office. And so back as early as October 19th, the forecasters were already talking about the new moon cycles coming up, and we're looking at potential, well, the astronomical high tides, the king tide cycle, early November, December, and January. And so the concern was, all right, as the time approaches, let's take a look for any meteorological concerns that could create large surf and swell events. Later in October, the Weather Service office in Guam posted a social media graphic to Facebook. And so we detailed all 3 of those king tide cycles, November, December, January, and we indicated the maximum tides or the amplitude of the tides for each of the islands across our forecast domain. And so you can actually see for the November king tide event, for Palau specifically, the highest tide was actually higher than the December event and also the January event. Consequently, though, November had no impacts. There was no large swell generators. December was the big one. Later in November, another email was shared among the forecasters talking about the potential of a massive storm system in the central Pacific near Midway Atoll up to the west-northwest of Hawaii. And so this potential event was likened to 2008's tropical storm Dolphin that dropped down out of the central North Pacific near Wake Island, and then dropped southward toward the Marshall Islands. It created a bit of a dynamic fetch, and this resulted in some massive swelling across the northern islands of the Marshalls. And so this was a concern that should it phase with the king tide cycle, we could have some major impacts. And so the target date was December 5th. Getting a little bit closer, we're looking at some of the PAC-IU's wave run-up guidance. And so we put up a Facebook post highlighting the Marshall Islands could possibly see some inundation with that large swell building in with the king tides. We had headlines that were added to our text forecast, and then that social media going hand in hand. By the 4th of December, we had high surf advisories issued for Pohnpei and Kosrae, and so they're a little bit farther west inside Micronesia. You can see it in the top graphic on the right. And then the king tide cycle full force, Sunday, December 5th. At that point, we started getting reports of inundation. And then by December 6th, we started indicating the possibility or expected minor inundation across most of the islands of Micronesia, and then another corresponding Facebook graphic on the bottom right. Now, the interesting thing is, let me go back to that real quick. You'll see in the blue boxes were indicating those islands that we had the concern for minor inundation. So Majuro and Palau. these are the two locations, the only two locations where we have PAC-IU's wave run-up guidance. Guidance is offered for Kwajalein, but Kwajalein is not one of our forecast areas. And then guidance also exists for Guam, but the guidance did not suggest any such concern for our area. So some rhetorical questions that I think is good to ask ourselves. One, was the model guidance or contextual background information sufficient to suggest the likelihood of such a high impact coastal flooding event? And so one of the questions, or maybe one of the considerations, is with global models perhaps have too coarse a resolution to really pick up on the magnitude of small scale but high impact events. Number two, do forecasters have the appropriate guidance to follow for identifying perhaps a set list of procedures, what to look for and how to forecast these events? Number three, were forecasters maybe waiting for a team approach, somebody to say, all right, let's go ahead, let's pull all the stops, let's go ahead and contact everybody. This looks like it's going to be for real. Let's tell everybody to prepare. Were forecasters waiting for somebody to kind of take the lead on that? And then ultimately, did duty manuals, do your directives provide the guidance on how to handle such a scenario? So what are your inundation criteria island to island? Every island has certain vulnerabilities. Are your criteria, do they exist? And then is everybody well aware of them? And then what about communication tactics, social media, phone calls, WhatsApp? What are your processes for communicating as widely as possible? So let's go to the second event, the July event. And so this is just going to be a look at social media posts, not really going into the forecast and the official text forecast, but we're just looking at the social media because social media, especially for the Micronesia region, is a really a great direction to go to communicate with the general public. So for National Weather Service Guam, there was only one post ahead of the July king tide event, and basically it announced that the king tide cycle was approaching, and there was a possibility of we'd be expecting higher high tides, lower low tides, and so ultimately we noted there's no significant swell or surf events, so we didn't expect any major impacts. And so we mentioned the lower low tides because sometimes people may get alarmed when you see a lot of exposed reef, more than you're used to. That's one of the things with tsunamis. One of the precursors of a tsunami could be rapid drop in water levels. So we wanted to go ahead and make sure people were well aware ahead of time that you're gonna see this over the next couple of days. But ultimately, if there were any impacts, we wanted to employ the general public to be our eyes on the ground, because here at the Weather Service office in the middle of the island, we can't really see the ocean and the coast from our office. So having people out there with the cell phones is a great way to get feedback. Jumping over to the National Weather Service office in Honolulu, they also had a post very early on, about a week out. They highlighted the Perigean spring tide. What is it? And then they had a later post talking about the tides coming up, and also soliciting the public help and reporting observations of any inundation. And of course, be mindful of your surroundings when taking photos. Yes, we want those reports, but we want people to be safe when they do it. Later on, Hurricane Darby approaches from the east. The graphic on the left, the time stamp on that graphic is actually Chamorro Standard Time here in Guam. So don't focus so much on that time stamp versus the time stamp inside the graphic, Hawaii Standard Time. Hurricane Darby, about 115 mile per hour storm. It was weakening, but it was going to be passing south of Hawaii and expected to create a lot of larger surf. So they mentioned hazardous surf along south and eastern facing shores. And then also the next day later, still weakening, a 90 mile per hour hurricane, but still calling for high surf, dangerous surf on south and east facing reefs. A couple of days later, now you've got historic surf on south-facing shores. And so 12 to 16 feet with occasional sets of 20 feet. So this is pretty massive surf for the south-facing shores. And the question is, was this massive swell from Hurricane Darby, which was expected to pass, basically just be a remnant tropical depression as it passed to the south? Or could it have been the large South Pacific swell? Or could it have been both? And so I present you with these two graphics. This is from the Pacayus Voyager, looking at the Wave Watch 3 peak wave direction on the left and the peak wave period. So looking at the spectrum of colors, you can definitely see two general themes going on. Well south of Hawaii, you can see the southerly swell pushing up. That is corresponding with those very long periods, coincident with the south swell. There's also in the farther northeast corner another south swell, and so these periods are a little bit shorter. So this is probably that precursor south swell event. There was a couple of surges of large south swell. Closer to Hawaii, though, we see a much smaller period wave, and these are coincident with east to southeast swell. More of your wind wave, and then coming right into the Hawaii, the Big Island, we got about a 13-second period wave coming out of the southeast, and so that could be part of your Darby swell. And if you look at some of these pixels near the Hawaiian Islands, that could be a little bit of the refraction of the Darby swell coming around the islands. So there's a couple of things going on, and perhaps I would say it's quite likely that right close to Hawaii, the largest swell was easterly, southeasterly swell. But still, it was a very notable south swell that was coming up into the Hawaiian Islands. It's just that it may not have been the highest swell. It could have been something 10 feet versus 9 feet. But this longer period ultimately equated to much larger surf on the south-facing shores, hence their high surf warnings. So it's a really interesting situation of two things kind of combining to create some really complex surf situations. American Samoa, their weather office down there, National Weather Service, they had a lot of communication on social media. They did a great job. They communicated the event with multiple posts leading into the event. They had attention-grabbing posts that really focused on the most need-to-know information. They were steady. They had great graphics, and of course, this middle image, you can see they had a video. They usually do a lot of Facebook Live presentations, which is a great way to get the weather information straight out to the public, straight from the mouth of the forecaster. During the event, they continued a steady flow of information, highlighting those concerns. In addition to a massive south swell event, they also had a strong wind event across the region. So they had all those other hazards and impacts to communicate. And so they continued to be very on top of the communication. And really, when you're continual like this, it does create a reliability that the general public has in your office. And so the general public then knows exactly where to go for more information, and they don't have to wonder where to search for other information. And so that's a good thing about social media when it is used to the fullest of one's ability. So during and after the event, they presented some of the tide gauge data. So basically, you're showing verification of a forecast. This is verification of those warnings, those surf hazards that you were talking about. And so for a forecaster, verification is always a good thing. And then, of course, even as the event is winding down, people will certainly get fatigued. And so when do things calm down? And so they already, American Samoa is giving that end time frame that hold on just a little bit longer, things will be calming down pretty soon. We're already on the downswing. Things are gradually improving. It's going to be just a little bit longer. And then ultimately have that bookend, that event wrap up. This kind of recaps the event, tells people what happened, and just kind of puts that closure on the event. And this is something personally that I like to do, is to provide that closure and some type of event wrap up. So as we go into conclusion, I wanted to create a framework for forecasting and communicating future events sort of like this. And so across the Pacific, we are nothing but many islands. There are a lot of data gaps. And so thankfully, through many different international organizations from NOAA, National Weather Service, CDIP, the Buoy Center, PAC-IUS, National Ocean Services, Bureau of Meteorology, so many other organizations that collect and share data. It is through University of Hawaii Sea Level Center, through all these organizations and all their data sets. As if forecasters can put all this data together, then we can actually fill in those gaps, and we can fill in a better framework of understanding of impact, potential impacts. And so this is what we try to present here. So first things first, king tide cycles, they are infrequent, but their occurrence and timing are well predicted. So we can get early on glance at these timeframes months in advance. Now, all you need is just a lunar cycle calendar, and that's your starting point. Now, for the weather-related causes, the large swell generators, with global models, perhaps 1 or 2 weeks in advance. Some models go out farther, but your confidence doesn't start increasing until you're maybe certainly within the 2-week period, and then you really boost your confidence within the 1-week period. And so we kind of present a V-shaped forecast funnel to kind of guide the forecaster thought and guidance in this process. And so on the left side, we'll be presenting some data sources. Some may be relevant for your location. Some of you may have locations that are a little bit more variable in location. So you may have different data sets, but you probably have access to parallel data sets. And so you'll certainly want to modify this to fit your locality. The V shape is ideal because at the top, you're at a very long lead time. There's a lot of uncertainty. But as you get closer to the less than a day, to the day's outlook, your certainty should be increasing. And now you have a solitary and definite event to forecast and communicate. And then on the right, actions to consider from an operational standpoint. Are you talking just in your office, or are you bringing those communications outside your office? So first of all, take a look at the astronomical cycle. Note when the new full moons are, the king tide cycles. New and full moons on their own, even outside of the Persian king tide cycle, are still going to result in higher amplitude tides. So those still can lead to some inundation events should you have those swell generators nearby. Take note of the INSO pattern and how that could be affecting your regional waters. Do you have a gradual decrease in sea heights, or is your region largely higher with sea heights? This is also a good time. Take a look at your office directives, your procedures. Is everybody on the same page with understanding those, and are your procedures really up to date with everything that you need? You'll see that I have URLs and also QR codes. I think these QR codes should still be relevant. I hope they are, but otherwise URLs are still relevant. Brandon is checking right now. As we get a little bit closer, now we're still kind of weeks to a month out. Take a look at the tide gauges across the region. See where your residual water levels are. Are they still in a surplus on the positive side, on the negative side? If they're on the negative side, then you've got a little bit more room to have those largest swells come in. But if they're on the positive side, any type of swell event could be a little bit more impacting to your area. At this point, if you see something, then maybe have that in-office discussion talking about the upcoming astronomical event, and then maybe the background water level setup, and then the potential meteorological concerns. As we get closer to within about a 2-week period, definitely start looking at that global model guidance. You don't have to look too much in detail, but be sure to look at across the entire Pacific Basin, because wave groups definitely travel. They follow the great circle paths, and so they can propagate across a very long distance. And so you want to take a look at the big picture across the oceanic basin to make sure nothing could be a surprise. If you see something in the long-range global models, definitely share it with each other in your office. And then maybe, do you have government partners, planning emergency managers that you should be considering, just giving them a heads up? Hey, we're looking at this. Just FYI, we're not too concerned right now, but we are looking at the potential of some large surf and swell on week 2. But we're going to keep an eye on this. We'll let you know if anything looks increasingly concerning. Now, as we get a little bit closer, we're looking at the wave models. Keep in mind, different wave models have their biases. Various wave models derive their marine wave heights and everything from the GFS model, some based off the European model, and then certainly your regional weather models, depending on if you use stuff from Bureau of Meteorology or other sources. Each model does have its biases, so make sure you're aware of those and where they may have weaknesses and certain swell events, swell directions, wind waves, long period swell or short period. So keep that in mind, but keep on looking at it. And then if you do have guidance, sort of like this PAC-IUS wave run-up guidance model, access that within the week and a half out. And then as your forecast certainty increases toward a perhaps a high impact event, then definitely increase your communication, and then be sure to reach out, put it into the public spectrum through social media, whatever platform that you use. Get the word out. Get the word out through a full team approach from your office, from your partner government organization, emergency managers. Be on the same page so that everybody can see that agreement and consensus, and then can take the right actions. So this is pretty much the last slide, and just kind of the everything in a nutshell. And so I just want to present this. Looks like our emails went ahead and defaulted to that natural blue font, but that is William.Aydlett. I apologize for that. I had them shaded as yellow. And Brandon.Bukunt, both at NOAA.gov. David will also have those email addresses. But I guess, David, we'll turn it back over to you. And if there's any questions, I see Brandon is furiously typing, so he's actively answering questions. Thank you, Brandon. Anything else you want to say, Brandon?
Yeah, just real quickly, more in an anecdotal sense than anything. But it is rather fascinating when sometimes I'm out there in the ocean, and when you have certain ingredients align with each other, they certainly can produce impacts that are a bit outside of what's expected. So that constructive interference between different ingredients is certainly a big factor with a lot of these impactful events, and the 2 that we noted here today. So just trying to do our best to pick apart what factors are at play, when are they aligning to maybe create the biggest impacts. From somebody that enjoys being out in the ocean, I do find it fascinating how sometimes it really, things can really phase and stack together to produce rather impactful scenarios.
Thank you, Brandon. All yours, Dave.
Okay, so why don't we make the questioning now oral? So if you want to open up your mic and ask a question, go ahead. And I just put in the comment section, Jimmy had put a comment about somewhere where you can report king tides, like National Geographic resource. There's also PAC-IUS also has a reporting system like that, that's specific for the Pacific region. So I put that link in there too, if you want to, if you see something, say something sort of situation.
Yeah, And I would also add on to that, reports of events are great to have as forecasters because it really helps us to know that something did happen. If we expected something, we want to know that it did happen. But probably even more important is if something didn't happen. If we had a king tide cycle and no inundation impacts, especially if the PAC-IU's wave run-up guidance is suggesting there could be some inundation and nothing happens, I find it just as important, if not more, to know that nothing happened, because then it helps us to refine our understanding of the models and the guidance. And is it a short period relationship? Is it a long period wave relationship? And I think I see that Doug had mentioned in the chat talking about the long period stuff, and I fully agree that a longer period swell does have some significant impacts, even if it is smaller than a short period wave. But they all behave differently, the time of the tide cycle. And so eyewitness reports are crucial, especially and absolutely beneficial to forecaster understanding of the models.
Okay, so does anybody have a question? You can just open up your mic and say so, or if you're on the Facebook side, you can send me a message. That was a really great talk. Very straightforward and clear, and a lot of information. So no questions from anybody. Okay. Especially Brandon B's talk reminded me that in the future iteration of the Pacific Desk, we need to talk about the 9-band presentation, and even the model, the display of the WaveWatch 3 can give you the impression that there's only certain swells in certain areas, but what it's actually showing is your dominant swell in that band. Brandon, do you have a slide with a 9-band that you could show?
Feel free to.
There is, so yeah, I think you mentioned this one.
Yeah, so that's the model version.
Correct. And so
yeah,
I
so
think that is good, at least in an animated sense, that you can kind of better understand the swell contributions and I guess origins. And let me find, there it is. How about that?
Right. Okay. So that's the 9-band plot. So we haven't talked about this yet in our course, but this is a very useful tool. So what this actually shows is it shows the buoy data, and it splits it up into different periods. So the x-axis there are these like 4-second deviations of period. And then what it does is it shows you what swell direction is dominant in that period, and then it shows you what the swell height is. So this kind of clarifies a little bit, like if you look at the WaveWatch 3 and it shows you the different swells and the different periods associated with that, and it gives you a height, and the height will be a lot less than the significant wave height. This is what it's actually, what that WaveWatch 3 table is actually showing. So the heights here should match up. So this is actually pretty massive. A 7-foot swell with a 20-second period is going to be very, very large waves. But you don't necessarily see that in your general spectrum. You're not going to see that very clearly in the significant wave height. So I think I'll remember to talk about this in future classes, because this is a very important tool, and it can be accessed through PAC-IUs or CDIP. I think maybe Brandon got this. This looks like maybe the CDIP presentation. But yeah, under products on CDIP for any of those buoys out in the Pacific, you can pull up 9-band and it'll give you this. Okay, any final comments or any questions? Nope, not on the Facebook side. All right, Brandon A and Brandon B, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Okay, I hope I will be seeing you guys soon.
Absolutely.
All right, and then
Thank you.
I'm
Thank you, everybody.
gonna
Take
sign off.
care.
All right, thank you.